We are delighted to have with us Professor Christian Miller of Wake Forest University. He holds a number of different titles. He is the A.C. Reed Professor of Philosophy at Wake Forest. He's also the Philosophy Director of the Beacon Project, and he's the past director of the Character Project. He has authored several books and numerous pieces in major publications. We asked him to come today to speak to us on what we thought was a really, really timely and interesting subject. It's the subject of his latest book called The Character Gap. Now, following his presentation, you'll be able to buy the book if you would like to. It's $20. That includes tax, and he will be outside happy to talk with you and sign the book for you. But today he's going to be talking to us about themes from this book, because I think you know, if you're talking with your family or your friends, we kind of have a conventional wisdom in our society that basically we're all good people. And every now and then we've got some bad apples that come out and do terrible things. But most of us are, at our core, good, honest, kind, trustworthy people. The big question, of course, is that really true? And it is something that the professor has been looking at and has written extensively about. And with that, please help me to welcome here to the podium Professor Christian Miller. I'll let you take that, and we'll put that right up on your. Put that. You want to hold that there?
Yeah.
Wardrobe.
All right. All right. Thank you. Is it working good? You hear me good? Okay, great. Good afternoon. Come on. that was not very good. Let's try again. It's about how my students do it. Good afternoon. There we go. Good. Now we're awake. So it's great to see you all. Thank you for coming out. I'm really humbled by the opportunity to be with you today and honored by this invitation. I look forward to discussing these ideas. My understanding is that I'll be speaking for a while, and then we'll allot about 10 to 15 minutes for question and answer at the end. Is that how you normally proceed? So I'll keep an eye on the time, make sure we don't shortchange, because I really want to get your feedback and hear your thoughts about this. As was already mentioned, there's going to be some themes from this recent book that I wrote, The Character Gap, How Good Are We? The topic of character, though, is something I've been working on for over 10 years, starting with, I was mentioning the Character Project. So if you're just interested in what we're doing at Wake Forest and some of the research, not only Wake Forest, but we funded internationally. We funded over 28 scholars to the tune of about $3 million for their projects on the topic of character. Please come visit our website and see all the really cool things we've done there. For today, though, I want to focus on some topics from the book. The book is a non-academic book. It's meant to be a trade book or a popular book, taking a lot of what we've learned at Wake Forest with the Character Project and the research I've been doing for a number of years, and making it more accessible for a broader audience. Get all that academic lingo and jargon and stuff out of the writing and make it engaging and fresh and interesting, and really try to reinvigorate a discussion of character and kind of bring back to people's attention how important the topic of character really is. So I begin the book with a story about Walter Vance, and I'm sorry it's going to be depressing for a while. I guess it's just unavoidable when I talk about character. There's going to be some depressing sides to this, but there's a real point to bring up the story. This is Walter Vance. He was shopping at Target on Black Friday, so we all know what that is like, the day after Thanksgiving when the stores are mobbed. He was trying to get some Christmas decorations for his small store in a town in West Virginia. And he had a history of heart trouble. His health was not very good. Lo and behold, he collapses on the floor in an aisle at Target. So if that happened to you were not collapsing, but if you were shopping at Target and you saw someone collapse, what would you do? You would help, right? Naturally, you would do something. You pull out your phone, call 911, you rush over and attend to the person. Well, not so much in the case of Walter Vance. I mean, he was so excited about Christmas this year. He wanted everyone to enjoy the holiday he loved so much. And here he was lying on the floor in obvious pain. The shoppers did nothing. They turned around and went the other direction. Some of them even stepped over his body so they could get that TV or whatever it was that they wanted before anyone else. You know, those Those discounts only last so long, those TVs go out fast. So by the time some nurses saw him, they called 911, and they finally brought the paramedics, but it was too late. He died on the way to the hospital. So this is an example of a failure of character, where there was a clear emergency, a clear need going on. People had an opportunity to help, and they didn't. They didn't step up to the plate. Now, was it something just specific to that Target store or that town in West Virginia? I don't think so. I think it illustrates something deeper about what our character and our moral psychology is like, and I'll explore that as we go along. So that's where I start with my own book and my own thinking in the character gap. But here's what I want to do in our remaining time. I want to first start with a preliminary question. What is good character in the first place? I'm a philosopher, so we got to define our terms. We got to start with we got to start with a clear idea of what we're even talking about in the first place. Then we'll go on to the question of what is good character. That's the first one. How good is our character is the second one. Empirically, psychologically, how are we doing today? Are we pretty good? Are we pretty bad? Or are we somewhere in between? And then finally, some promising strategies for developing a better character. So what is character? How are we doing? And then can we do better? How might we do better? Make sense? Sound good? Are we ready? All right. So let's start with the first one. I'll need your help with this. I don't want to just talk the whole time. So what is good character? I'm going to start with some assumptions. Just grant me the assumptions. Let's go with them. And I'm going to ask for your input on a couple questions. So I'm going to assume that a person with a good moral character is someone who has moral virtues. Okay? So what's an example of a moral virtue? Someone, give me an example. Yes?
If a person had an opportunity to quietly put some money on the side from their company, how they would make the decision between being moral, immoral, or immoral.
Good, right. And if the person does the right thing, they might be exhibiting integrity in that kind of example. Right? I would say that the person who does the right thing in that situation is exhibiting integrity. That's an example of a moral virtue. So definitely, yes. Honesty, that's another good one. Give me another one. One more. Justice, compassion. Good. So there are lots of examples we could add to the list here. Courage, temperance, fortitude, graciousness, gratitude. On the flip side, a person with a bad moral character is someone who has moral vices. Obviously, right? Give me an example of a vice. Cowardice, greed. Okay, too many going on at once. So the opposite, we can flip the ones we've already done. We could say dishonesty, cowardice, injustice. So I'm going to start with these assumptions. They're pretty straightforward. But then they just back up the question one step. Instead of what is good moral character, what is a virtue? Let's probe that. And instead of giving you the academic, really abstract, theoretical definition, let's work through an example together. I think we'll arrive at a definition if we do this. So I need your help again. If someone picks up some drop papers only once, is that sufficient for being a compassionate person? If they do it only once. Come on. No, clearly not, right. So what's missing here? I mean, it's a good thing they pick up the drop papers, right? That's a thumbs up. But they only do it once. What's missing? Twice. It needs to be twice, right? Then you got compassion, right? Not twice. But it needs to be more frequent than that, wouldn't you say? Consistency over time. So there needs to be more frequency, or as you said, consistency to one's helping. Okay, let's add that then. If someone frequently or consistently helps, but only when it comes to picking up drop papers. First of all, they'd be a strange person, but secondly, is that sufficient for being a compassionate person? No, clearly not, right? What's missing here? Sacrificial. That could be part of it too. But let's focus on only when it comes to picking up drop papers. Breath, very good. Yeah, breath, good. I think you were saying that too. So not only does it need to be consistent over time, it needs to be consistent across situations. So it can be like breadth and depth, or consistency across situations, consistency over time. Let's add that. I put it in terms of diversity, but you said consistency, cross-situational consistency to one's helping. Okay, we're doing better. We're getting closer. Now we said someone is being reliably helpful in various situations. Is that enough? What if they're doing it only for purely self-serving reasons, like making a good impression on your significant other or putting oneself in a good mood? Right? So the behavior we give a thumbs up to. Right? They're helping reliably across situations and over time. But what about the motivation? Is this person compassionate? Oh, okay, that was very, very definitive, right? I agree with you. Others agree? Motivation
I would say
matters.
there's always a component of self-satisfaction when you do something
Okay.
courteous. So there is legitimacy to that too.
Okay. So save that thought. Ask me at the end, or I'll clarify in a minute. Well, isn't there some benefit to being virtuous? How can that be then if it's incompatible with being self-serving?
There's only.
Okay. So I think there needs to be something more going on than just this. I think there needs to be some good motivation, some virtuous reasons behind one's actions. And they can't just be self-serving motivations or reasons. Okay? And this is not just true for compassion, it's true for all the virtues. A virtuous person is like this. Someone who acts admirably, we said that, behaves morally admirably, in a diverse range of situations relevant to virtue. Can't just be in one type of situation, a diverse range, stably over time. It's not like the virtuous person is virtuous for 1 week and then that's it. They stop. No, it's stably over time. And here's the last one, primarily for good and admirable reasons and motives. Okay? Now, what about the benefits? So I'll say something briefly about that, and then we can talk more in the question and answer about benefiting. It can be true that you pursue your own self-interest as well. There's more than one motive or reason when we act. It can be. So I may be trying to benefit someone else and also try to benefit myself too. But the primary focus had better be on benefiting someone else for a compassionate person. If you benefit yourself in the process, that's as well. But if you're only aiming to benefit yourself, if you're only focused on yourself, the idea is that's not compassion. Now, like I said, I can talk a lot more about that. That's going to be controversial. So I'll just put that on the table and use that as a way to get some good questions later. What about moral vices? Okay, we're going to say this is a moral virtue. How do moral vices work? You flip the script, right? Instead of morally admirable, morally dishonorable, or morally bad. Immoral. Yeah, immoral. That's a good one. Even more straightforward, right? In a diverse range of situations, with the vices too? Yes. Stably over time? Yes. Primarily for good and morally admirable reasons and motives? No. Right? So vices work in some of the same ways as virtues, but they have the opposite focus on the bad or the immoral as opposed to the moral. Okay. That's the preliminaries. That's the philosophy. If you're not into philosophy, you can wake up now because we're going to do something else. If you are into philosophy, sorry, that's about it for now. But we can always talk more later. That's part one. Defining our terms, getting clear what we're talking about. We're not talking about characters in drama productions and me going to Broadway and seeing lots of plays or anything like that. Sometimes I'm asked about it. So you study Broadway and like you go to a lot of plays and think about characters in plays? And I say, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about moral character. Okay, so we need to define our terms. Now, the main topic for today, how good is our character? This is something I can't answer as a philosopher. Right? I can't just sit in my armchair and ask the question, how good are most people? I need some concrete data to work with. What kind of data? I'll get to that in a second. But let me just give you my answer right off the bat. For most of us today, it is not virtuous at all. I can see the room gets very quiet. I told you it was going to be depressing. So when we turn to the empirical question, how are most people today? How are we doing, morally speaking? I think the conclusion is we're not very virtuous. Most people, not all. It's a bell curve here. There are outliers. There's, Abraham Lincoln, there's Jesus, and there's Gandhi, and there's Confucius on one side, and then you put Stalin and Hitler and so forth on the other side. They're outliers, but there's a bell curve, and most of us are not qualifying as virtuous. Now, you all are exceptions, I'm sure, so I'm not speaking to you specifically, but I'm just talking about people in general. Okay? What does that mean? That means most of us today do not have any of the moral virtues. It's a pretty strong position here, pretty radical position. Why? Why did I come to that conclusion? You can come to that conclusion in a variety of ways. You can read history. I think history backs it up. You can look at different religions. A lot of religions say things along these lines. You can look at current events, politics, and the like. It backs it up too. But I don't do any of those things. What I do is I look at psychological research. I look at psychology studies which put people in specific situations and saw how they behaved. So you put a group of people, hundreds, individually, one at a time, in a particular situation. Does the person cheat or not cheat? Steal or not steal? Lie or not lie? Harm or not harm? Help or not help? And then from those studies, collectively, looking at hundreds and hundreds of them, we can draw a picture about what our character looks like. And that's what I've done. We have hundreds and hundreds of studies to draw from, going all the way back to the 1960s. And collectively, they paint a picture, I think, that's along these lines. Let me give you just 3 examples. Of course, you don't want to hear hundreds of these. So I'm going to give you 3. Now, don't think, wow, he read 3 studies and jumped to this big conclusion. Right? So cut me some slack, right? I read a lot more than these 3, but we only have a little bit of time. So I'm going to give you a selective sampling. OK? Ready? Here's the first one. This is from Robert Barron, a psychologist from 1997. OK, 22% of men and 17% of women helped who had passed clothing stores. What's the context here? This was a study where people didn't know they were part of a study. These are just shoppers at a mall, right? And they had just passed clothing stores. And they were given an opportunity to help. It was make change, OK? So they were approached and said, can you help me make some change? And 22% of men and 17% of women said, yes, I can do that. So what? Who cares? Well, look at that. 45% of men and 61% of women helped who had passed Cinnabons and Mrs. Fields cookies. If you need a visual illustration of what that is, and there you go. This was not around North Carolina, so we couldn't put a Krispy Kreme, I guess. Krispy Kreme is based in Winston-Salem, where I'm coming from. But it makes the same point. Cinnabons, Mrs. Fields, the smell impacted the shoppers. Same helping task. That was the same. Same mall, same day. All that was held constant. It was the smell from these 2 stores. That seemed to make a big difference to whether people helped or not. That's bizarre, first of all. You can ask me what the story, what's the explanation? You can ask me that in the Q&A. But the point is, look, that's not what I would expect of a compassionate person. A compassionate person would help or not, irregardless of the smell, whether they had passed Mrs. Fields cookies or Cinnabons. Okay. Now you might say, well, that's pretty minor. It's not like someone's dying or anything like that. We're just talking about making change. So let's not get worked up about that. Okay, fair enough. Here's one where a lot more was at stake. A classic from psychology, 1969. This has to do with the bystander effect. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the group effect. Here, imagine this is you. You've signed up for a study. You're told to go into this room. You go into the room. You sit down. You're given some papers to say, fill out these papers for me. Say yes. OK, you start working on the papers. Here comes a stranger you've never seen before, given the same instructions. Sit down over here. Fill out these papers. OK, the 2 of you are working on the papers. Clear? The person in charge leaves the room, goes into the next room. After a little bit of time, there's a big crash in the next room. Just imagine, we should have coordinated this ahead of time, and you could have acted it out for me. But right over there, there's a big crash, and we all hear it. And then there's this sound like this. If they were listening carefully, participants heard her climb up on a chair to get a book from the top shelf. Even if they were not listening carefully, they heard a loud crash and a woman scream as the chair fell over. Oh my God, my foot, cried the representative. I can't move it. Oh, my ankle, I can't get this thing off me. What would you do? This was happening in the next room. Yeah, sure you would, right? And you probably would, and you all would, but most people don't. It really depends upon what the stranger does, who you're with. If the stranger does nothing and keeps working on the forms, overwhelmingly likely you will do nothing too. And you will not help in any way. How likely? That likely. That likely. 7% helped in any way, which means 93% of participants who heard that cry from the next room did nothing to help. Okay? And that's directly a result of that person next to them, the stranger, not doing anything him or herself. Okay? So now this is one where a lot more is at stake. This is when we can't say that's morally trivial, not very significant. This is very significant. And by and large, people didn't help. Okay? And this has been backed up now. This has been replicated. It's also been used with different variations. So having a man experience an epileptic seizure instead of falling off a ladder, a maintenance worker fall off a ladder, a man cry out in pain from what seemed to be a serious electric shock. Sorry, I got to point this way. Stream of smoke coming into the room. So now it's not someone else. It's your own self-interest. Like, what if smoke started coming into this room? What would you do? Well, if no one else is doing anything, they're like, you're so engrossed in my lecture, and no one else is doing anything, you're just going to sit there too while the smoke's keep coming in. Watching a thief steal cash, a young man steal a case of beer, and a bully beat up a child. The most disturbing one of all, perhaps. So in group contexts, when no one else is doing anything and an emergency is occurring, we're very unlikely to do something ourselves. That's not a good reflection on our character either. One more, and I think I need to go a little quicker. The very recent study, that was an old one from 1969, much more recent, and shifting gears now to honesty, matters of honesty. Lisa Hsu and her colleagues had a control condition where participants took a 20-problem test and knew that the experimenter checked the answers and oversaw payment of 50 cents per correct answer. Okay? So you just go in, you give them the test, say work as hard as you can, and we're going to pay you 50 cents per correct answer. But we're not going to let you grade it. The person in charge is going to grade it. Straightforward, right? But that's not so interesting. This is interesting. A shredder condition. Same test, same monetary incentive. Only difference is that participants get to grade it themselves. And then they get to shred all their materials. Right? And just verbally say, I got this number right. Right? So again, what would you do? What would most people do? You would do, of course, you would say the right answer. You would be honest. But what would most people do? Well, that's not the actual shredder, but it does the job. Here's the baseline. We need the control condition because we need to know what would happen if there's no opportunity to cheat. 8 problems, answer correctly. What do you think is going to happen in the shredder condition? I've already primed you, right? I've already set you up. It would be really surprising if it was 4 problems or something like that. That would not seem to go at all with what I've been talking about. And lo and behold, 13.22 problems answered correctly. Way higher in the shredder condition. Is it possible that this was just a smarter group? Possible. Theoretically possible. Yeah, that's theoretically possible. Is that the most likely explanation? You want to buy that? I'll sell you some other things, right? No, we know what the most likely explanation is that this group was being dishonest. They were taking advantage of the opportunity to cheat because they knew they could get away with it and make more money. Okay, so those are 3 studies. Collectively, as I said, when I read hundreds and hundreds of studies like this, I don't see a pattern of virtuous behavior nor virtuous motivation that I would expect if most people were in fact virtuous. So I conclude most of us are not good people in a sense of having the virtues that we already talked about. This is something I argued at great length in 2 academic books, not the character gap, but before that. I also talk about the character gap as well, but if you really want to dive into the nitty-gritty details, this is where the hundreds of studies are discussed in these 2 books. Okay, so a natural question is, well, what are most people in fact like? I mean, you might not be surprised to find that most people are not virtuous. It might be what you'd expect. So there's a good question here. If we're not virtuous, what are we like? Are most of us this, or this? Maybe most people are vicious. Maybe most people have no character at all. Maybe character doesn't even exist. Maybe it's an illusion or a fiction. Or maybe most people are in some kind of middle space where they have a mixed character. Some good, some bad, not good enough to qualify as virtuous, not bad enough to qualify as vicious. So there are some options here to consider, and we have to say, what does the evidence tell us? And I can tell you what my view is, but I think I'll just leave that on the table as a as a teaser. So whatever option you take, we're confronted with a character gap. This is the name of the book. There's an actual character down here. There's a virtuous character up here. And I say there's a significant gap between the two. Whether you think it's because we're vicious people, or there's no character at all, or we have a mixed bag of a character, doesn't matter. And every single option, there's a gap between this, and it's pretty large. Does that make sense? Can I postpone to the end? Is that OK? Yeah. Because I only have a few minutes here, and I want to make sure we get through just a couple more things. So given that character gap, if I just stopped right now and it said, see ya, bye-bye, that would be kind of depressing, right? That would be kind of mean of me. Said, here's how we are. Most people are the virtues. See you later. Or if I ended the book right there, that would be kind of mean too, I guess, or not very nice of me to do. But there's good news. So I want to end on the positive, to say that there is actually good news for character improvement. We're not stuck with the characters we actually have. Some people in the past have held that view. No one, as far as I know, in psychology or in philosophy, thinks that anymore, that our character is just fixed or permanent. It can change. It just can't change very quickly. Right? There's no like magic pill you can take that's going to make you from dishonest to honest overnight. But fortunately, there are some strategies. And I'll just give you three, maybe just two if we don't have time. Strategies for trying to become better people. I don't think there's one correct strategy. I think there are multiple strategies. They can work together in tandem, and they can make some real progress here. One has to do with role models. I don't think I need to say too much about this or these people here. The third person, someone who's not as familiar, he protected 20 Jews in a sewer system during World War II for over a year, which meant having to crawl through sewer pipes. Think about that, like in-use sewer pipes to deliver bread and water to those 20 people for over a year during World War II. His name is Leopold Sosha. So here's the idea. When we hear stories about these people, we can come to admire them, and then furthermore want to emulate them, to become more like them, to see them as role models in our lives who we can try to aspire to become like. Not by dragging them down, but by lifting ourselves up to them. Does that make sense? So that's the idea of the first strategy, finding good role models, moral role models, to emulate in one's life. And there's some support for this. I think I'll skip over that one. But look at the second one. This just goes back to the crash and the group and not helping. Well, what if two people heard a crash in the next room, and again, these cries and screams, but this time, a stranger acted quickly to help. Instead of the stranger doing nothing, the stranger acts quickly to help before the participant does anything. Well, that stranger now is a role model of what to do, and participants are overwhelmingly much more likely to help themselves. When the stranger does nothing versus when the stranger acted quickly to help. The rating of the helping out of 10, 6 versus 9. In other words, the helping went way up when a role model acted quickly to break the group effect, to provide us with an example of what to do in the case of an emergency. So that one I think I'll pass through quickly because that should be pretty familiar. Second one, more reminders. So this has to do with the idea that, look, we often know what the right thing to do is. It's not like we're ignorant of morality. We know we shouldn't cheat. We know we shouldn't lie in most cases. We know we shouldn't steal. We know we should help other people. We know we shouldn't hurt other people. We know those things. But our focus can get skewed, can get off track, can get misaligned, just like on Black Friday. Those shoppers at that Target, they knew what the right thing to do was, but their focus was elsewhere. They were so fixated on that deal, on that TV, on that stereo system, on whatever it was, that they weren't paying attention to the most important values and principles, the moral ones. So moral reminders come along. If we have moral reminders in our lives, they can help it get us back on track. And the more often we are reminded, the more natural it will be to think of what is right and what is wrong the next time. These moral reminders can be everything from, remember the bracelets people used to wear WWJD, what would Jesus do bracelets. They can be tattoos. They can be readings you start your day with. You start your day with a certain kind of moral reading or religious reading to get you on track and focus on the right things. They can be text messages that you have sent to yourself. You can program text messages or emails to come to provide you these reminders. And they work. Interesting, powerful, how powerfully they can work. Remember this? The tests, the cheating. Another study using the same setup. Different questions. These were harder questions. In the control condition, only 3.4 correct out of 20. Shredder condition, 6.1. Cheating was going on again. This is nothing new. We've already seen this before. A third condition, signing an honor code. Look what that did. Cheating disappeared. So for students who had first been told to sign the honor code of their university and then have this shredder condition, the opportunity to cheat, they didn't do it. The honor code served as a moral reminder, getting in their minds what's most salient, what's most important, morality, doing the right thing, being a person of honor, eliminated cheating altogether. Well, what if there's more incentive? $2. Let's ramp up the stakes. They're 50 cents, okay. What about $2 per correct answer? There's 20 problems here. That's $40. I can make a lot of money, right? Again, control didn't have any choice about that. Sorry, you didn't get a chance to cheat. Shredder, cheating, some. Honor code, no cheating. So we ramp up the reward from 50 cents to $2. It did not incentivize cheating anymore in the honor code condition. This works as well with the 10 Commandments. So in another study, when participants were given the opportunity to do the shredder condition, to cheat, but they were first asked, recall as many of the 10 Commandments as you can. Cheating disappeared. Even if they couldn't remember any of them. I can't remember any of them, but just merely the activity of recalling the 10 Commandments gets you focused on the morally right thing. Okay? Does that make sense? Sort of. Support for the idea of moral reminders. Last one, and I promise we're going to wrap it up and still have time for discussion. Getting the word out. This is just basically education. This is learning more about our characters so we can work against the bad sides and promote the good sides. Okay? And this is premised on the idea that we don't have transparent understanding of all of our character. In other words, we don't know ourselves completely when it comes to morality. There are parts of our mind, our moral psychology, that we may not be aware of. Right? And this is borne out again and again in the studies. When I asked you, what would you do in that group setting? You said you would help. Well, if you had actually been in that group setting, you may not have. Right? You may not completely understand your own psychology and some of the impediments that are there in your mind to helping. In particular, in a group setting, fear of embarrassment. And how powerful fear of embarrassment can be to hold us back from helping other people. That's what goes on in that 1969 study. That's what was going on in the Target, Black Friday. And it goes on all the time, fear of embarrassment serving as a hindrance to us doing the right thing. So here's the idea. Let's educate ourselves. You don't have to read psychology journals, but you can read The Character Gap, or you can read other things. No, sorry, that was a lame plug. You can read other things. You can see lots of stories online about the discoveries that are being made with respect to our psychologies. The more mindful we are about these things, and when we're in situations which they might be activated, we can work to compensate for, correct, or encourage the good ones, of course, not the bad ones. And this is what I'll end with, an example of this idea. Go back to the bystander effect one more time. What happens if we educate people about the influence of groups on helping or not helping? That's what these researchers did. They had students hear a lecture which explains how groups can inhibit helping. And then they staged an emergency. So we're going to test this. If we educate our students about this phenomena, will they actually rise to the challenge more so or not? there was an emergency, non-responsive bystander, 67% of the students helped. How much was it in this 1969 study? What was the percentage? 7. 67% of the students helped. Huge difference. Only 27% of controls who did not hear the lecture helped. Okay, so this was not 7%, but still low. I mean, it's very low, 27%. Look at the difference, 27% versus 67%. Now you might say, well, that's the same day. Not so surprising. You heard the lecture in the morning. You had the opportunity to help in the afternoon. They also did a variation 2 weeks later. Would it make a difference? And it did. 42.5% helped versus 25% of controls 2 weeks later. As a professor, if I had that impact on my students, I would be ecstatic, right? If they remembered anything I said 2 weeks later and it impacted their lives to that extent, that would be incredible. I would be through the moon. But it's not 100%, but it's something, right? And that's the idea. The third strategy is to become more familiar with our psychologies and how we're put together, and then work against some of the ways in which we are hindered from being virtuous people. So to leave you with 2 final questions. Do any of these strategies sound promising to you? Do you like any of them? Do you not like some of them? And are there other promising approaches besides these 3? The answer is yes. But what are they? I'd love to hear your thoughts of strategies besides these 3. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you so much. Sure.
I was just going to mention, about 15 or 20 years ago, the Wake County Schools wrote a program on character education. I didn't know what those 2 words together meant. And I asked a lot of people, what does character education mean? Very few people can answer that. But it turned out to be really interesting. I got involved in it, and they actually identified character traits and began to teach kids in elementary school. You had to be honest, you had to be truthful, integrity, courage.
Right.
There were like 15 traits that they taught.
Good.
And it really helps when people, as you say, when people hear about that, I think it makes a difference.
Good.
Parents are the problem. They don't teach the kids like they used to the importance of good character.
So is the program still in existence today, or is it, do you know if it's still going on now? Be interested to learn more about it.
I don't know. I haven't been involved in it. I don't know if anybody else is still involved in Wake County Schools or not. But, the opinions at the time was it's a serious erosion of character in society.
Yeah. Right. So on the question of parents, might matter how you phrase it. If you talk about character, that might be one thing. If you talk about specific character traits, that might be another thing. It's hard for me to imagine that there are many parents who don't care about their children growing up to be kind, loving, compassionate, honest, people of integrity, courageous. So when you start mentioning specific character traits, those have a broad appeal across political divides, across religious divides. And it's like I said, I'm a parent myself. I have 3 small children. It's just hard for me to imagine not caring about those things and think they're really important.
Make a big difference. One thing they told us was, think about this situation. Parents tell their kids to be honest, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. But here comes a hurricane, and a father gets outside, taking action, breaks up the deck, so he gets the insurance company to pay for it. Well, is that good? What message is he really communicating to those kids?
Right.
So it's what they see as well as what they're told.
Okay. So it's one thing to talk about it being important, but it's another thing to see it demonstrated in the lives of the people that they look up to. And if the lives are not matching the words, then that's going to foster some thoughts of hypocrisy, and they're not taking it really seriously, so why should I take it seriously? That's a very nice point.
Professor, first of all, thank you for modeling the virtue of gratitude. You've done it right there.
Well, don't go too far.
I've always appreciated priming effect studies and various kinds of social psychology studies. Could I play devil's advocate for a second?
Sure.
And bring up the other shredder condition, which is, shouldn't we be, particularly given some recent disclosures, when we hear about studies like this, shouldn't we be somewhat skeptical or concerned that if a psychologist spends a lot of time putting together a study and finds no real difference between the control and the experimental group, that study might end up being flawed for some reason they didn't perceive ahead of time? They will shred that one. They will do the study again until they find something that is more likely published in a journal.
Right. So this is, absolutely fair point. This is the file drawer effect. So you run a lot of these studies, a number of them don't find anything. So you kind of put the study into the file drawer and you shut it and lock it away. And right, journals are not interested in no effects. Journals are interested in interesting effects, significant effects. So fair enough. What would that cause me trouble? That's the question. So I'm looking at studies which have been around for a long time, they've been replicated, by and large, that found significant effects. If there are other studies that were not so promising, for example, people had an opportunity to cheat, but they didn't take advantage of it, and therefore that research was not published. I would want to know that too, right? And I don't have a way of knowing that. So then I think what I have to conclude is I can't be too overconfident in this picture I'm painting. I'm going to have to say, this is a reasonable interpretation of the data such that it is, but it's not a conclusive picture of our character. It's only a partial or a fraction of how we're actually put together. And we don't have nearly enough studies, especially published ones, to draw a comprehensive picture. I think I just have to be humble about what I'm saying in light of that problem. Yeah, thank you.
I want to make you feel a little bit better about that.
Okay.
I just retired from the pharmaceutical industry and did clinical research for many years.
Okay.
There was a big hue and cry about unpublished studies, which was true. But now, if you have a study in the pharmaceutical industry and you do not put it on the public website for clinicaltrials.org, you will not get it published.
Okay.
So there's now a rule that forces people to give out the negative results, which previously were not always done.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah,
So we're now very virtuous.
So
Wait, my notes is getting a little long. Sorry.
You're obviously very concerned and have the deep feelings about what you've studied about, time and effort that you put into it. My question is, how do you evaluate yourself? And the second part to that is, how valid is self-evaluation?
Good. So two different questions. Since I've spent so long studying the character topic versus someone who has spent very little time and then is engaging in a self-evaluation. So in my own case, I think I've learned a lot about myself that makes me ratchet down my judgments. I think I was one of those people, in college and so forth, who thought I was doing pretty well. I'm not perfect, I wouldn't say that, but I was by and large pretty honest and compassionate and so forth. I was checking a lot of boxes. I was a pretty virtuous person. Having read a lot of this research, that's caused me to change my self-evaluation. And I definitely put myself in that middle. Maybe I'm vicious, but I don't, hopefully I'm not vicious. So I put myself in that middle space between virtue on one side and vice on the other side. I think I'm very much a mixed bag, like most people are. And I really want to stress that too when I talk about these ideas. I don't want to come across as saying, I've got it all figured out, and I'm one of those outliers who's very virtuous, and here I've come to tell you, how wretched you all are, and here's the path that you can go on to become virtuous. No, I'm very much in this messy middle myself too. Now, switch to the other question you asked. How about just the folk in general, people in general? How accurate are their moral self-assessments? And here I would say, on a scale from 1 to 5, when people are asked, rate your honesty, rate your justice, rate your compassion, and so forth, or rate your virtue in general. Time and again, people put themselves with 1 being low and 5 being the highest, put themselves around a 4 on virtue in general and on particular virtues. So they're rating themselves as above average and pretty good. If I'm right about the facts, then their self-assessments are mistaken. They're too high. My ranking would be closer to a 3 out of 5 as opposed to a 4 out of 5. So then I would say people's self-assessments may not be wildly inaccurate. I mean, that would be too skeptical. That would be too strong a position. But they are error prone, such that we inflate our own opinion of our moral character, and it needs to be deflated down to a more average level. Yeah, thanks. I'm not in charge here, so.
The examples that you use of virtues, of helping somebody in distress, not cheating on an exam, are easy in our society.
Yes, by design.
Use the
Yes.
example of what lots of us would call sexual immorality, or teaching 6-year-olds that they don't know what gender they are. And a lot of the things that the left and the right argue about regularly.
Right.
Who chooses what behaviors we use these tools to reinforce, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, good, very good question. So you rightly noted my strategy, which is to stay away from hard cases, and yeah, right, and go with some easier ones. So, yeah, and that's by design. This was intentional. My overall philosophy here is, look, there are these hard cases for sure, but there are so many other cases where there's widespread agreement about, whether to cheat or not, lie or not, steal or not, help or not, harm or not. Then let's focus our attention on those cases and try to improve people's character there. And then, let's make some significant progress there. And we can't neglect the other ones too, but I want to kind of get us pointing in that direction. Now, when it comes to just adjudicating those more controversial disputes, this isn't going to help. We actually need to enter into a discussion of ethical theory and foundations of morality. Where does morality come from? What does morality have to say? What theory of morality is the best theory? Is it Aristotle's theory, or is it Kant's theory, or is it utilitarian theory, or is it some other theory? So these bigger picture questions about ethics that I haven't touched at all today, the promises, the hope is that they, although they of course are fraught with controversy too, that they can help us move forward on abortion, on stem cells, on death penalty, on these other more controversial matters. But I'm by design staying away from that because I want to be ecumenical in getting people interested in the topic of character across the board.
Yes.
John Adams said that our Constitution was only made for a religious and moral people and was wholly inadequate to any other. Based on your presumption there, what's the health of our democratic republic here, do you think, and where are we going?
That's a big one. That's a big one. So couple. Well, so many different directions they go in here, and some pitfalls lurk too. So following along the lines of this question here, I in my published research stay away from religious questions because again I want to try and draw as many people into the discussion as I can, except for the very last chapter of the character gap. And the very last chapter of the character gap is one having to do with religious resources for improving character. And so I'll focus on that, the democratic side of things, and our country. Ask me afterwards, okay? So what I wanted to do towards the end of the book was getting into strategies for improvement, as we talked about already. And I first focused on secular strategies for improvement. And I gave you 3 of them today. The very last chapter, though, it has to do with religious strategies for improving our character. And I thought to myself, look, religions have been around for a long time and have said an awful lot about character. It would be a mistake to neglect what they have to say and pretend as if they don't have anything to offer us. So in that chapter, I looked specifically at Christianity. And this comes back more centrally to your question. And what does the Christian tradition have to say about how to improve character. I did that strategically because I didn't want to offer a quick, like 5 pages on Confucianism, 5 pages on Taoism, 5 pages on Islam. It'd be so superficial and so almost insulting to the religions to do it that way. So I wanted to kind of dig deeper into a particular religion and offer a kind of overview of what it has to say, while noting that there are some similarities between what Christianity has to say on character and other religions too. And so in that chapter, I offer 3 main ideas from the Christian tradition. One has to do with the importance of religious practices, one has to do with Christian community, and one has to do with the internal workings of the Holy Spirit. And that's way too much to get into in our few minutes remaining, but that, I think, is a way to proceed while taking very seriously what Christianity has to offer, but also acknowledging that other religions have things of value to offer as well. And then coming back to the question of our society, the thought is, well, if you take those Christian elements away, are you losing something in society? Right? Those kind of Christian contributions to character development, or more generally, religious contributions to character development. Will a society kind of stay the same, improve, go down on moral matters? On the topic of moral character. And I do, in that chapter, spend about 5 pages looking at some empirical data in this connection. So what's the correlational evidence between measures of religiosity and things like criminal behavior, donating to charity, volunteering your time, smoking, graduating from high school, all these kind of other things which we think are important. And the correlational evidence, I think, is pretty clear that as religiosity goes up, these good things go up: increased volunteering, increased donations, decreased criminal behavior. And then as religiosity goes down, you see the opposite effect. So there does seem to be a correlational relation. Now, I'm specifying that, causal is murky, but correlational relationship between religiosity and good indicators of character.
Last question. You got a quick one?
How's that for an answer? Todd, your question.
Okay, follow up on the lady's question about how good can your own self-assessment be?
Mm-hmm.
You answered statistically, but how can you be good? How can you avoid the errors that you were thinking about?
Good. So the question is, how can you avoid these errors? And that's where I would go back to this third strategy here, which I like a lot, which is getting the word out. And this is involving learning more about what your own psychology is like, on the assumption that your psychology is probably not so different than most other people's, right? So when you read about the bystander effect, I think that the proper inference to have is not that those are some bad apples over there, or some strange people, but rather, well, I probably like that too. Right? All these people didn't help in an emergency when no one else was helping. I assume that I would help, but now I read this research and I think to myself, well, actually, maybe not. Maybe I'm a lot like them too, and I shouldn't assume that I would step up to the plate and that I have such a better character. So again, to sum it up, learning more about the research and then assuming that it applies to you too can be a way to improve the accuracy of one's own self-assessment. That's